When I was growing up, there wasn't much to do at home. We didn't have high-end computers or cell phones allowing us to browse the internet whenever we wanted. Hell, most of us didn't even have video game consoles. I say most because there were a few spoiled kids who seemed to get everything they asked for and more. Even though I didn't have access to the multiple worlds video games provided, I did have a TV in my room. While it was entertaining enough for the most part, if any of you are anything like me, sitting around mindlessly watching TV was almost torturous as a kid. It's ironic because now, as an adult, I live for those days. Apart from watching TV or reading a book, or even worse, doing chores, my activities as a kid were pretty limited. So I, like most of my classmates and friends, would seek enjoyment from the outside world. We would traverse the neighborhood exploring, playing sports though we rarely had enough people, or simply riding our bikes around outside for hours. This was how I spent most of my time growing up as a kid. I would wake up, go to school, then I would rush home as quickly as I could to drop off my backpack, before dashing out the door once again. I would grab my bike and make my way over to one of my friends' houses. We would meet up and ride around all day. At first, I was barely allowed to leave the driveway, let alone cross the street. But as I got older, my boundaries slowly lifted. I could ride my bike down a few houses, then around the block. And eventually, my range was only limited by time. If I wasn't back by a certain time, I would be grounded, and that was something I didn't want to happen. During the week, our curfews were fairly early. We all needed to be home by 5 p.m. to eat dinner. Then, if we wanted and didn't have any homework, we could go back out and hang out until 8. During the weekends, however, we were allowed to stay out until 10. The weekends were amazing, sure, but summer vacation, that was true freedom. I'm not sure how it was for other kids my age, but during summer vacation, I was allowed to roam around outside until midnight. Crazy, I know. In hindsight, that was probably poor parenting, but I like to think I came out of it just fine. Well, aside from the night terrors and the therapy sessions, that is. Summer vacation was nearing its end, and we all dreaded the thought of going back to school. Even though we tried our best to avoid thinking about it and soaking up the last bits of freedom we had, the back-to-school commercials on TV reinforced our despair. It was the final week before school was to start up again. As usual, my friends and I were all riding around on our bikes, when one of my friends mentioned riding to the park on the other side of town. We all looked to one another a bit apprehensive. Even though we had been all over our neighborhood and the surrounding neighborhoods, the other side of town would be the farthest we've ever gone. Throwing caution to the wind, we all agreed, and the 5 of us pedaled our bikes faster in the direction of the park. As we weaved off sidewalks and past parked cars, I couldn't help but look up at the sky and notice the sun was slowly falling. The town park was just your average town park. It had a vast open field. On the field was a baseball diamond. Next to that, wrapped up in a chain-link cage, was a basketball court. On the side of the field, next to the parking lot, was the community area. Concrete bathrooms and cookout stations which were rusting into dust. On the far end of the field was the playground. A colorful structure of twists and turns, slides that contorted themselves into crazy shapes. Colorful pyramid rooftops capped certain spots of the playground. Jungle gyms and monkey bars littered the area. And next to that was 3 rows of swings. This place was the best park in town. It was the only park in town, but I digress. The park itself actually had times it was open. During the week, it was open from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m., On the weekends, it was open until 10. This was the city's attempt at combating drugs and mischief, I suppose. Even though the park closed, it was widely disregarded by most people. You can't really lock up a park. However, if the police showed up, everyone would scatter out of fear of trespassing. After our long journey, we arrived at the park late in the evening. It was around 8 p.m. when we made it there. And as soon as we arrived, one of our group looked at his watch and told us that he had to leave. We asked him why he rode all the way out there with us, and he said he didn't realize how late it was. Not wanting to make him pedal all the way back home alone, another one of us left with him. My two remaining friends, including myself, teased the two, calling them both chickens. My two other friends, John and Ryan, both stayed with me at the park. We pedaled through the parking lot and onto the grass field, our tires snapping twigs as we rode over them. We laid our bikes down, walked up to the playground, and, well, began playing. John climbed up on the jungle gym, while Ryan went down the slides numerous times. I myself climbed up to the top of one of the triangular roofs of the playground, a thing I had learned from watching the older kids play when I was younger. It was very dangerous, and you didn't want to do it if the parents were watching, but you could see the entire park from up there. As I sat up on top of the plastic roof, the sun had completely diminished and all that remained was a stark twilight. Ryan walked below me and asked how long we were going to stay there. I looked down at him and asked if he was scared, to which he replied a determined, "No." I laughed so hard I almost fell off my perch. My leg slipped to the side, but I managed to stop myself by leaning over and grabbing onto the edge of the roof. When I did this, my gaze dropped to the nearby area. That's when I saw someone sitting on one of the swings. It was dark, but I could clearly make out a person swaying gently back and forth. I couldn't tell if it was a teenager or an adult, but I held my breath as I slowly slid down from the roof. I called my friends over in a hushed tone, and they both walked over to me. I asked them if either of them knew who that was, and they both shook their head. We all watched him for a few moments, wondering who it could be, but he didn't move, apart from gently swaying back and forth. We all nervously looked around to one another. We knew that regardless of who it was a stranger and we shouldn't interact with strangers. We all climbed off the playground and walked over to our bikes. As we picked them up, I happened to look back over at the swing. That swing was still swaying back and forth, but the person that was on it was gone. Suddenly, I heard a scream and a crash as John's bike fell to the ground, our heads snapping in unison. Ryan and I saw someone towering over John. He was tall, much taller than he seemed to be sitting on the swing. He wore a long black coat with equally black pants. His face was dark and patchy with hair. He almost looked like a deranged homeless man. But one thing about him sent an absolute terror shooting through us. He was covered, head to toe, in blood. Blood smeared across his face. It dripped off of his long coat. Even his extended hand reaching out to John glistened red in the moonlight. In a swift motion, he grabbed John up by the neck and brought him to his face. He smiled wide with broken teeth and gums. John's gasping cry for help snapped me out of it, and I tapped on Ryan's shoulder. We both looked at one another, nodded, and both charged the man. We slammed into his lower torso. He was thin, but it felt like we charged into a brick wall. He didn't move much, but it was enough for his grip to loosen on John. John fell to the ground, scrambling away from him. The man knelt down and scooped me up by the shirt. He stared into my eyes with a fiery rage. Then, he reached into the pocket of his coat and pulled out a long, rusted chef's knife. Even though at that point I was hyperventilating with fear, I wondered how such a long knife could fit in his pocket. He pressed the cold steel against my cheek, and I felt tears stream down my face. John and Ryan both shoved at his legs. I fell out of his grasp, and we all made a break for our bikes. We all pedaled harder than we ever had before. The clicks and grinding of our chains rattled as we rounded the corner, and we didn't let up until we finally made it home. After years of therapy and having night terrors once a month, every month since that day, I've tried my best to have a normal life. Everyone that I tell the story to said it had to be fake, that I made the whole thing up. But whenever I look at myself in the mirror, I see the long scar on the side of my face from when I fell from his grasp with a knife pressed to my cheek. It's a reminder that what I experienced was real. And it's a reminder to never, ever go back to a playground after dark.